It was the summer of 1864. The United States was still torn apart by the Civil War, and President Abraham Lincoln was carrying the heavy burden of both leading the fight and preparing for re-election. Not everyone supported him. Confederate sympathizers despised his leadership, and even some in the North had grown weary of the war. Threats against the president were constant. On August 23rd, while traveling from the White House to his summer residence at the Soldiers' Home, just a few miles outside the city, Lincoln came dangerously close to losing his life. The route was lonely and wooded, making it risky. During one of those evening rides, a gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet passed so close that it pierced Lincoln's tall silk hat and knocked it off his head. Incredibly, Lincoln was unharmed. The shooter was never identified, though many suspected Confederate sympathizers. Lincoln, calm as always, is said to have brushed it off, remarking that his time had simply not yet come. This mysterious incident is often forgotten, but it stands as the first real attempt on the life of a sitting U.S. president. But the threats didn't stop there. Less than a year later, tragedy struck. 1865. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln was at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., watching the play Our American Cousin. The Civil War had just ended, and the president was in high spirits, relieved that the long conflict was finally over. But John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and Confederate supporter, had been plotting for weeks. He originally wanted to kidnap Lincoln, but changed his plan to assassination after the South's defeat. Booth and his allies even planned to attack other leaders to destabilize the government. That night, Booth slipped into Lincoln's private box at the theater. Around 10:25 p.m., he fired a single bullet into the back of the president's head. Booth leapt onto the stage, breaking his leg, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," Latin for "thus always to tyrants." Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house where doctors worked through the night, but the wound was too severe. He passed away the next morning, April 15th, at 7:22 a.m. Booth fled, but Union soldiers caught up with him 12 days later. Trapped in a barn in Virginia, Booth was shot and killed. Lincoln's assassination shocked the nation and set the stage for one of the most painful chapters in U.S. history. James A. Garfield, 1881. The next presidential assassination came only 16 years later. James Abram Garfield, the 20th president, had been in office for just a few months when he was targeted. On July 2, 1881, Garfield was walking through the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station in Washington, D.C., preparing to board a train for his summer vacation. As he walked with Secretary of State James Blaine, a man approached from behind. His name was Charles J. Guiteau, a mentally unstable drifter who believed he deserved a government job and that killing Garfield would somehow help the nation. He fired 2 shots. One hit Garfield's arm, while the other lodged deep in his abdomen. Garfield collapsed instantly. He was carried back to the White House, where medical care at the time was shockingly poor. Doctors probed his wound over and over with unwashed hands and unsterilized tools, desperately searching for the bullet. Instead, they spread deadly infection. For 70 agonizing days, Garfield suffered. His weight dropped dramatically, his fevers climbed, and his condition worsened despite every effort. Finally, on September 19, 1881, Garfield died of infection and internal complications. Guiteau was arrested at the scene. During his trial, he claimed that God had told him to do it, but the jury rejected his insanity plea. He was convicted of murder and executed by hanging on June 30, 1882. Garfield's assassination showed not only the vulnerability of presidents, but also the limits of 19th century medicine. By today's standards, his wound might have been survivable. William McKinley, 1901. 2 decades later, tragedy struck again. On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley was in Buffalo, New York, attending the Pan American exhibition. That day, he was scheduled to greet the public inside the Temple of Music, a large exhibition hall. McKinley had a reputation for being approachable, and he was happy to shake hands with citizens who had lined up to see him. Among them stood Leon Czolgosz, a self-described anarchist who believed the U.S. government was corrupt and oppressive. His right hand appeared to be bandaged with a cloth, but hidden beneath it was a revolver. As McKinley extended his hand to greet him, Czolgosz fired 2 shots. One bullet grazed the president, but the other tore into his abdomen. McKinley staggered, but urged the crowd not to harm his attacker. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where surgeons operated through the night. They managed to remove 1 bullet, but they could not locate the second. At first, McKinley seemed to be recovering, but within days, infection set in. On September 14th, just over a week later, the president died from gangrene caused by the bullet wound. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt was immediately sworn in as the 26th President of the United States. As for Czolgosz, he was quickly captured at the scene. He confessed openly, saying that he had done his duty as an anarchist and showed no remorse. He was tried and convicted of murder within weeks. On October 29, 1901, he was executed in the electric chair. McKinley's death marked the 3rd assassination of a U.S. president in less than 40 years. After Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, the country began to take presidential security far more seriously. The Secret Service, which had been founded after the Civil War to combat counterfeiting, was now officially tasked with protecting the president, a responsibility it still holds today. A pattern of violence. By the dawn of the 20th century, the United States had lost 3 presidents to assassins' bullets and had seen another narrowly escape an attempt before his murder. Each case had different motives, from Civil War revenge to personal delusion to radical politics. But the pattern was clear. Being president came with enormous risk. And, unfortunately, the attempts were far from over. Even though Theodore Roosevelt had already served as the 26th president, his story belongs here because of one extraordinary moment. By 1912, Roosevelt was running again for office as a third-party candidate under the Progressive or Bull Moose Party. On October 14, 1912, Roosevelt was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, preparing to give a campaign speech. As he stepped out of his hotel and waved to the gathered crowd, a man named John Schrenck approached. Schrenck, a Bavarian immigrant, had been stalking Roosevelt for weeks. He believed Roosevelt was plotting to become a dictator and claimed he had been instructed in a dream by the ghost of William McKinley to stop him. Schrenck raised his revolver and fired a single shot at point-blank range. The bullet struck Roosevelt in the chest. But here's where fate played a strange role. Roosevelt's thick overcoat pocket contained a folded copy of his 50-page campaign speech and a steel eyeglass case. The bullet passed through both, slowing down just enough before lodging in his chest muscle. Roosevelt coughed. No blood came out, which told him the bullet hadn't hit his lung. Amazingly, Roosevelt insisted on giving his speech anyway. For the next 90 minutes, he spoke to the crowd, beginning with the unforgettable line, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Doctors later confirmed that removing the bullet would be too dangerous, so Roosevelt lived the rest of his life with it inside his body. He never regained the presidency, but his survival that night became legendary. In 1933, just weeks before Franklin Delano Roosevelt was sworn in as the 32nd president, he too came close to assassination. On February 15th, in Miami, Florida, Roosevelt was delivering a speech from the back of an open car. Standing only a few feet away in the crowd was Giuseppe Zangara, an unemployed bricklayer from Italy who hated politicians and blamed leaders for his poverty. Zangara pulled out a pistol and fired several shots at Roosevelt, but standing nearby was Chicago Mayor Anton Schermach. He was struck by the bullets and fatally wounded. Roosevelt himself was unharmed. Zangara was quickly tackled by the crowd. He confessed that he didn't specifically hate Roosevelt. He simply wanted to kill any leader he could. Zangara was executed in the electric chair a month later. Schermach's death gave rise to one of history's enduring what-ifs. Had Roosevelt been killed before even taking office, the course of the Great Depression and World War II might have been drastically different. Harry Truman, the 33rd president, wasn't living in the White House for part of his presidency. The mansion was undergoing major renovations, so Truman stayed at Blair House, just across the street. On November 1, 1950, two Puerto Rican nationalists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola, launched an armed attack on Blair House in an effort to assassinate Truman and draw attention to the independence movement. As the gunmen approached, White House police officers and Secret Service agents engaged in a furious gun battle right outside the president's temporary residence. Torresola fatally wounded Officer Leslie Caufelt, but Caufelt, even as he lay dying, fired back and killed Torresola with a single shot. Collazo was captured alive. Inside, Truman was napping upstairs. He woke to the sound of gunfire, but was never in direct danger. He later commented that he never held hatred for the attackers, though he recognized their cause could never justify violence. Collazo was sentenced to death, but Truman later commuted his sentence to life in prison. Decades later, President Jimmy Carter released him as part of a broader pardon of Puerto Rican nationalists. No story of presidential assassinations can be told without mentioning John F. Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th president. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas, alongside his wife, Jacqueline. Crowds lined the streets, cheering. But as the limousine passed Dealey Plaza, shots rang out. Kennedy was struck twice, once in the upper back and fatally in the head. Governor John Connally of Texas was also wounded. The president was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but was pronounced dead less than an hour later. Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine and Marxist, was arrested for the crime, but before he could stand trial, nightclub owner Jack Ruby shot and killed Oswald on live television. Kennedy's assassination remains one of the most studied and controversial events in modern American history, spawning countless conspiracy theories about whether Oswald acted alone. What is certain is that Kennedy's death shocked the world and forever changed America. Richard Nixon, the 37th president, survived multiple plots, but one of the strangest came from Arthur Bremer, who had initially stalked Nixon before shifting his attention to Governor John Wallace, whom he shot and paralyzed in 1972. But Nixon faced another bizarre attempt in February 1974, known as the Sam Bick plot. Samuel Bick, deeply troubled and angry at the government, planned to hijack a commercial airplane from Baltimore-Washington Airport. His plan was to crash it directly into the White House to kill Nixon. Bick stormed the aircraft with a pistol and homemade bomb, killing a police officer in the process. However, before he could take off, security forces shot him. His plan never got close to the president, but it revealed how creative and dangerous assassination attempts could become. Gerald Ford, 1975. 2 attempts in 1 month. Gerald Ford, Nixon's successor, faced not 1 but 2 assassination attempts in September 1975. One, September 5th, Sacramento, California. Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a member of Charles Manson's cult, pulled a pistol on Ford in a public crowd. Her gun jammed before she could fire, and she was subdued immediately. 2. September 22nd, San Francisco, California. Just 17 days later, Sarah Jane Moore, a political radical, fired a revolver at Ford from a crowd outside a hotel. The shot missed thanks to a bystander who grabbed her arm at the last moment. Ford survived both scares unharmed, but the attempts highlighted how open presidents often were in the 1970s. On March 30, 1981, Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, gave a speech at the Washington Hilton Hotel. As he exited to his limousine, a young man named John Hinckley, Jr. opened fire with a revolver. Hinckley fired 6 shots. A bullet ricocheted off the limousine and struck Reagan in the chest, puncturing his lung and narrowly missing his heart. 3 others were wounded, including Press Secretary James Brady, who was left permanently disabled. Reagan was rushed into emergency surgery, but survived. In typical fashion, he joked with doctors, asking, "Please tell me you're all Republicans." Hinckley later claimed he was trying to impress actress Jodie Foster. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent decades in psychiatric care. Reagan's survival made him one of the most popular presidents of the modern era, and the assassination attempt reinforced the role of the Secret Service in close protection. In 1993, just months after leaving office, former President George H.W. Bush visited Kuwait. Intelligence agencies uncovered a plot by Iraqi agents loyal to Saddam Hussein to assassinate Bush using a car bomb. Kuwaiti authorities foiled the plot, and later investigation confirmed it was personally ordered by Saddam. In response, President Bill Clinton ordered a cruise missile strike against Iraqi intelligence headquarters in Baghdad. This event showed that even former presidents remained high-value targets.
Bill Clinton, 1994 and 1996. Bill Clinton, the 42nd president, faced 2 serious threats. 1994, a man named Francisco Duran fired 29 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle at the White House while Clinton was inside. Luckily, none of the bullets reached him. 1996, during a visit to Manila, intelligence intercepted a plot by al-Qaeda to bomb Clinton's motorcade route. The plan was foiled at the last minute. George W. Bush also had brushes with danger. 2001, a man tried to crash a plane into the White House, but he was intercepted. 2005, in Tbilisi, Georgia, a man threw a live grenade at Bush during a public speech. Miraculously, it failed to detonate. Brack Obama, the 44th president, received numerous threats, especially during his first campaign as the first black president. The Secret Service reported record numbers of threats during his presidency. Several were disrupted, including white supremacist plots. In 2011, a man named Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez fired multiple rounds at the White House while Obama and his family were inside. No one was harmed. Donald Trump, both as president and former president, has faced repeated threats. In 2020, a North Dakota man was arrested for plotting to kidnap and kill Trump. In 2024, the most dramatic came during his campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, when 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks opened fire. Trump was struck in the ear, narrowly surviving, One spectator was killed and others injured before the gunman was neutralized. 2024, September. Another plot unfolded at Trump's Florida golf course. Ryan Wesley Routh, a 58-year-old, attempted an attack but was foiled and later convicted in 2025. Trump remains one of the most heavily protected political figures in U.S. history because of these attempts. From Lincoln's tragic murder to Trump's near death in 2024, American presidents have faced an unbroken line of danger. Some died, some survived by chance or bravery, and some were saved only by the vigilance of others. These stories remind us that the presidency is not just about power, it comes with immense risk. And even in modern times, with the world's most advanced security, the threat of assassination still lingers.